Hey everyone, Casual Console Gamer here with another review. Dragon's Dogma 2, released in March of this year, is a sequel to Dragon's Dogma that released in 2012. It took me 20 hours to beat, including the post-game to get the true ending. But I'll admit, I didn't do much of the side content. Like always, here's my too long didn't watch, where I give you a quick overview of my thoughts and opinions on the game before going into more depth throughout the rest of the video. Similar to the first Dragon's Dogma when it launched, Dragon's Dogma 2 is in a rough state. It has a slew of technical issues such as NPC pathfinding, missing or lacking features such as stealth, major frame rate drops, and frustrating camera positioning during boss battles. To go along with the technical issues, the story of Dragon's Dogma 2 feels like large chunks are missing, tossed on the cutting room floor as they tried to complete the game for a deadline. Characters are introduced, although that is generous considering many times we just get a name and very little information about their motivations. Then those characters are just abandoned. But what makes Dragon's Dogma great is its world, exploration, and combat. The world is vast and filled with interesting things to see and do, while the combat is fun and engaging. However, neither of these things are perfect. The world suffers from a lack of enemy variety and placement, with your character being constantly bombarded by the same foes every few feet. The combat, while having a lot of tools at your disposal and vocations to switch between, often relies on your character grabbing onto large bosses and climbing up to attack weak points in a janky and frustrating maneuver. Overall, I would give Dragon's Dogma 2 a 7.5 out of 10, and I suspect that just like the first game, it will take an expansion like Dark Arisen to improve upon Dragon's Dogma 2. At $70 US or $95 Canadian, you may want to wait for it to go on sale or until a few more patches have been released before picking it up.
Behold, before you sits the rightful inheritor of the Dragon Throne, chosen by the dragon as its enemy. Behold and rejoice! Fortune has delivered us our savior at last! At last!
Alright, let's start with the technical state of Dragon's Dogma 2. I played it on the PlayStation 5 with the variable frame rate option on. This setting prioritizes frame rate, especially in the larger cities of the game. I found that while it maintained a pretty stable FPS without significantly changing the graphics or excessive blurring, the frame rate would still tank if there was a lot happening on screen. Going to the city during the day, it slows down. Fighting a horde of goblins and orcs, expect some stuttering. But worse than that, the entire game felt like there was an input lag on my controller. My character felt slow and clunky, with each button press giving me the impression that you needed to predict your attacks well in advance. Dragon's Dogma 2 does not have the tight controls of Dark Souls. There's not an instant roll out of danger or split-second changes to your movement or attacks. Your character feels sluggish, especially when you get knocked down. It could be long seconds before you regain your feet, all while the enemy wails on you. It's a good thing that you do have a pawn and up to 2 additional pawns to add to your party, because I would not have been able to solo this game, not with its performance. With the FPS issues aside, Dragon's Dogma 2 looks beautiful, with an environment that's lush and detailed. Exploration is a dream with a wide world to travel and discover. But with the open world comes other technical issues. NPC pathfinding is terrible, and it's made worse by quests that require NPCs to follow you closely. If they don't, you fail the quest and you have to backtrack to pick it up again. Pathfinding is a problem with your pawns, who seem determined to fall off every cliff and at every body of water in sight. They also glitch out of existence or get in the way of the camera during cutscenes. For a game relying on forming a party with pawns in order to beat it, it's unfortunate that the AI is so terrible that traveling with pawns often requires as much time reviving them after taking a fall as walking forward. I'm going to include this next section under the technical portion of the review since it does seem to fit there for me. Enemy variety and placement in Dragon's Dogma 2 is bad, especially for an open world game. There are very few enemy types and you're going to see the same variants over and over again, especially if you're determined to explore as much of the world as possible. There are orcs and goblins in a few different colors, harpies that are frustrating to hit as a melee character and have the ability to put you asleep, undead that only come out at night, and bandits that you won't really know they're enemies until they attack you, since they look exactly like the wandering pawns or humans all over the world. And that's pretty much it. There are boss monsters in the wild, like a griffin or an ogre, but we'll return to them in the combat section. The problem with the enemies are their placement in the world. Developers put enemies everywhere, to the point where you can't walk more than 20 or 30 seconds without running into a group of foes. That wouldn't seem much like a problem, but with a vast open world, a day-night cycle that means you don't want to get caught out in the open at night since the enemies become more dangerous, there is sometimes a rush to reach the next campfire or marker, but you keep getting into fights on the way. To make things harder, if you're injured, you're going to be stuck out in the wilderness for hours at a time, constantly taking damage, and that damage reduces your overall health bar, making it difficult to recover. The only way to get it back is to rest at camp or at an inn. but inns are few and far between, and the campfires require heavy packs to make it. So often you're going to be stuck in the wilds with a pitifully small health bar surrounded by hordes of enemies in all directions. Usually open world games will have enemies in logical placements. For example, you might have goblin camps available in the distance, or maybe next to caves, spaced appropriately so you can either fight them or not, but you will get ambushed a few times along the way. Dragon's Dogma 2 does away with the logical, and its developers feel like they just copied and pasted the enemies, spamming them endlessly in every direction. Logically, there are so many enemies compared to humans in this game that it really makes no sense that humans would have survived. There are thousands of goblins on the road, and you're going to be hacking your way through them on the way to your destination.
Worry not for me. The brine may swallow me whole, but I will not perish. There is a stone not far from here, known as a rift stone. Pray, seek it out. If you're truly the Arisen, then our paths will surely cross again.
Which brings me to the gameplay portion of the review. Dragon's Dogma 2 has two main areas of gameplay: exploration of the open world and combat. Let's start with the exploration. The world is vast, made even bigger by the fact that the map is filled with enemies. There isn't a lot of markers or towns on the map, making it much different from, say, a Ubisoft game. There are plenty of caves to explore, mountains to climb, enemies and monsters to slay, and treasures to loot. The world is varied and beautiful, and I found the best part of this game was just walking through the forests and hills with my party, exploring and discovering new areas. But there is a downside to having such a large open world, and that's the fast travel. Fast travel in Dragon's Dogma 2 is limited to set stones found in main cities. You can only fast travel after finding and touching one of these stones, or by placing a portable port crystal somewhere in the world. But fast travel can only work by spending a fairy stone, which is a one-time use item that's pretty rare in the world, at least until you get to the post-game. I only had a couple of these fairy stones during my main storyline, hoarding them until I absolutely needed to use them. Why are they so limited? Well, part of me thinks it's a way to force you to explore more or prevent you from bouncing back to town whenever you want, but a more cynical part of me thinks it's about microtransactions. That's right, you can buy these port crystals with real-world money, although the fairy stones will still cost you in-game currency, and they can only be bought from shops in small amounts. You want to return to town to heal without the inconvenience of walking back? That'll be $2. Out in the wilds without camping gear and you're almost dead? Not to worry, just give Capcom some money and they'll send you a full camping supply kit. So exploration can be fun, but can be arduous, made even more difficult by the onslaught of enemies that the developers placed in every nook and cranny of the world and the terrible pathfinding of your companions. But is there rewarding things to be found out in that world? Of course, there's new vocations to be found, there's treasures to loot, there's people to meet and quests to complete. Dragon's Dogma 2 is an RPG, with your character gaining levels as well as skills from a vocation that you can choose. Your vocations are things like mage, thief, fighter, all the classics to match your playstyle. And as you explore, there are new hidden vocations that you can find out in the world. Your pawn, which you create and customize, can also use a vocation, allowing you to match them to adapt your weaknesses. So I played as a fighter at the start of the game, making it difficult for me to fight at range or to heal. So I gave my pawn the mage vocation, giving her a healing spell and then some long-range magics to make up for my deficiencies. As you level up, your vocation skill increases, and you can select new abilities and talents until maxing it out. For quests, Dragon's Dogma 2 has the main story missions that I'm going to discuss a little later in the story section of this review, that are going to take you across the world. But there are also a lot of side quests that you can do for additional rewards. The side content isn't that great, with most of it just talking to people or rushing out into the wilderness to fight a creature or find someone that's lost. A lot of these missions can also be difficult to understand what you're supposed to do. For example, there may be a mission to convince somebody to let you have a cart. But you go to the marker and talk to the guy and he's like, no, I'm not going to give it to you. Then that's it. You have no other information or hints. Am I supposed to pester him again? Do I punch him in the face? Do I pick him up and throw him off a bridge? The game often provides no hints or information on the quest, just a vague, go here and do this without a lot of context. I'm not asking for a step-to-step quest structure and markers like a Ubisoft game like Assassin's Creed, where they direct you to exactly where you need to go, telling you in detail what you're supposed to do. Even a player who isn't paying attention at all can do those games. But Dragon's Dogma 2 can be incredibly obtuse with their quests. I'll give you an example. At one point in the main storyline, you're told you're going to need to attend a masquerade ball at the palace. The requirements for entry are you need formal attire and to wear a mask. The contact gives you the mask for free, and there's no information about what formal attire is or where you're going to get it. To make things harder, you're told in previous missions that if you're caught in the jail or the palace unauthorized, you're going to be arrested. That's all you're told, aside from the fact that the ball is going to be held at night. So I put on the mask and I went looking for formal attire. Obviously, the first place I went to was the clothing armor shop, since logically you would think you could just buy it there. After looking at what was offered, nothing really stood out. But I did buy a grand surcoat since it said something about being a noble garb. I went to the palace, walking past guards expecting to be caught at any moment. Now there's no stealth in Dragon's Dogma 2, so if you need to sneak into the palace and the jail at times for these quests, but there's no stealth mechanics involved, or there's not even any crouching. I learned that when you walk past guards in the jail, sometimes they completely ignore you, but sometimes they'll just attack you on sight. There's no real rhyme or reason to it. It's obvious that stealth was intended to be included in this game, but it was left out for some reason. So I'm back at the palace for this quest. I walk past the guards towards the waypoint where the ball is supposed to be held, only to be told by a guard that there's no masquerade ball that night. So I rest on a bench and I come back the next night, but I can't attend the ball that's being held because I'm not wearing the right clothing. So I go searching around the palace and I stumble on a chest in the back room, hidden away, and it contains a formal attire, and as soon as I put it on, the quest triggers. This is what quests in Dragon's Dogma 2 is like. You stumble and fumble your way through them with little more than a waypoint and no real information on what you're supposed to do when you get there. If there's clothing required for a quest hidden in a chest in a palace that you aren't supposed to be inside looking for, and then there's lacking a stealth mechanic to even reach there. There's another quest in the post-game where you need to convince a character's mother to evacuate, but she won't come out of her room. So you go to her and you talk to her and she says, "I'm not leaving," and go away. That's it. There's no other information or hints than that. How the hell was I supposed to know that I would need to physically pick her up and carry her out of the room? There's nothing that said anything about it. Or how was I supposed to know that in order to get a noble to give you the ox cart that you need for this quest, you need to pull out your weapon and approach him and he runs away scared and then you can get the cart? There's no hints anywhere in that game. All right, back to the exploration. You have fast travel fairy stones that you can use, but if you're being thrifty, you're going to want to ride on an ox cart that travels between major cities of the game. You simply hire it and you climb aboard, and once you're sitting, you can press the triangle button which lets you doze off to let time pass. This is supposed to be the poor man's fast travel mechanic. The problem is, because of the high enemy spawn rate on the roads, the ox cart is waylaid by enemies every 10 feet, making it even slower than walking, since you need to constantly climb off the cart, fight, and then reboard. The other major part of the gameplay is combat, and it's pretty fun. The magic and physical attacks work well. Aside from a few issues with the frame rate and some of the problems with your AI companions, I really enjoyed the combat. But there is one major issue I have with the boss encounters. A significant amount of the bosses are much larger than your character, requiring you to climb on top of them and attack their weak points. It becomes especially true in the endgame, where bosses can only be harmed by attacking these weak points. It's similar to Shadow of the Colossus, where the main character climbs slowly up to these weak points while your stamina drains. But the difference is, in Shadow of the Colossus, it was designed for it, with bosses being as much as a puzzle as a combat encounter. In Dragon's Dogma 2, the bosses aren't specifically designed for these climbing maneuvers, and when you combine the janky climbing with the camera problems and a screen filled with magical spells and attacks, it can quickly become frustrating. Overall, combat is best when you're fighting enemies of similar size to your character. Once it gets to the large enemies, it can really be a mixed bag.
We pawns have long awaited your arrival.
What is this? Pawns. They bend the knee to you so readily, but then... No. Surely you cannot be the Arisen.
You seek the Riftstone, do you not? We can take you to it. Pray, come this way.
The story of Dragon's Dogma 2 isn't great. This isn't something that's subjective, where it's my opinion. Objectively, there are major pacing problems and story issues in this game. It's clear that sections are missing, with characters being introduced and then forgotten. There are story points that are poorly explained, and sometimes, when I was confused on what was happening, I thought that I missed a cutscene or conversation with an NPC somewhere. But no, that's just how the story is set up. What makes it worse is that there are multiple flashbacks to help explain what's going on, but often I wasn't sure it was a flashback until afterwards. Here's the story in a nutshell. Don't worry, I won't be giving any major spoilers. You're the Arisen, someone selected by a dragon to be their counterpart, sort of like a fated enemy. You were a guard, at least I think you were a guard, when the dragon attacked your village and ate your heart. Now it's your your job to kill the dragon in a fated cycle that continues throughout the ages. As the Arisen, you are now the king of this new kingdom. So that's one of the major story plots of the Arisen. But a major issue is that Dragon's Dogma 2 has another storyline that is poorly implemented and told. As the king, you're betrayed and your memory is wiped and you're sold to slavery. In your place, a noblewoman has replaced you with an imposter who's using a piece of magic to control pawns, something that only the real Arisen can do. She's doing it so that her son can rule when he grows up. Helping her is a noble from another country who wants to use the pawn controlling magic to control the dragon and break the endless cycle of dragon and Arisen. Okay, so you have two major storylines that are going on at the same time, and they're hindering each other. The characters of the fake Arisen plot aren't really fleshed out, and you barely interact with them. There's one point where you're going to attend a coronation and confront the imposter, but your pawn freaks out and then you don't do it. It screams of cut content and makes the story a complete mess. There's also a secret true ending of the game. It requires you to use an item in a certain way that I would never have known about if I didn't Google it. So much of this game requires you to do things that aren't explained properly, like search a certain area or pick somebody up without a single hint.
Arisen, thou who wouldst slay the dragon, if thou seekest to behold this world in its true aspect, abandon thy reason.
So I talked about it a little bit earlier, but Dragon's Dogma 2 has extensive microtransactions. And not just cosmetic stuff, but rift crystals to purchase pawns, port crystals for fast travel, and wake stones, which are actually like extra lives. Of course, you can get all this stuff in game without paying, but you can also spend real world money on them. I didn't spend any money and I beat the game just fine, but there were times that I definitely felt inconvenienced by not spending extra. That brings us to the conclusion of another video game review. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a good game that suffers from technical and story problems. I would rate it a 7.5 out of 10 because of those problems. And even though I liked it, I would recommend that unless you're all the way in on the gameplay you've seen and are willing to ignore some of the problems, I would wait until it's on sale and a few more patches have been released. Better yet, wait until Dragon's Dogma 2 Dark Arisen, or whatever they're going to call the inevitable expansion that fixes this game's problems, is released. Thanks for watching and make sure to like and subscribe for more content.